Hi, Anil, are you there? Hello?
Sachin.
Anil,
Yes, Sachin.
am I audible? Am I audible? Anil, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible, but you cannot be seen.
Yeah,
Your video.
I have switched off my video. I have to start, but I'll
சவுண்ட் வந்துச்சு, நீ என்ன பண்ணிட்ட?
அது எனக்கு தெரியும்.
அங்க ஒண்ணும் பண்ண முடியாது. வந்துட்டு this is for audio.
Hi, Anil. Hello.
हाँ सचिन.
Yeah, I think Mark.
Hello.
Hello Mark.
He's trying to hello. Yeah, but his voice is muted. Professor Mark.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh.
Because of this too.
Yeah, Anil. Hello.
Yes, yes Sachin.
Okay. Hello, Mark. Good morning from India, and good afternoon. Maybe it must be past 3 o'clock in Australia. Please let me know if I'm audible.
You are audible Sachin.
I can't see you. Technology.
Anil sir, good morning.
Good morning sir.
You're ready, no?
Yeah, we still have what 2-3 minutes left, and
We will wait for a few minutes.
yes,
Once Joe sir gives us clearance,
yes.
we will start the program.
And our chief guest has not logged in yet, so we'll have to wait for him for 2-3 minutes.
Okay, no problem.
YouTube tab. Click on that link.
But where is that link?
Which I will use your.
You have sent me the link.
Yes, yes. Go to your mind here. No, it's not.
Sir, we are going to start in 5 minutes.
Who is letting the people in? You are doing.
Minimum resources. Amazing.
தோசை போட்டா நீங்க சார்ஜ்
अनिल सर को अनम्यूट करना पड़ेगा.
Anil sir,
Yes, sir.
we are good to go. We are going to start now.
Okay, good.
Kindly go ahead.
I welcome you all for this webinar on getting published academic and creative writing. After I shared the flyer and registration form, many participants asked questions about how to get published in UGC care list journals. For a moment, Dr. Sachin Labde, who is instrumental in getting today's resource person on board, and I thought that we might have titled the webinar in a wrong way, or it might have been taken in a wrong way. But then came the realization that the phenomena of publishing industry or the process of getting published is affected in various ways by various elements. As Pierre Bourdieu, a French sociologist or theorist, in his essay published in 1999, and the title of the essay is A Conservative Revolution in Publishing Industry. He states, and I quote from his text, a publisher is a person invested with all the extraordinary power to ensure publication, to confer upon a text and its author a public existence along with the fame and recognition it entails. Unquote. There is always transfer of symbolic capital bestowed by the publisher on author as well as publishing house. We as academicians, in fact, need to take into account that there are other avenues than UGC care list journals where one can publish the writings. And that is what today's sessions, I think, will be all about. The processes of writing and exploring the publishing industry. Before we begin, I must thank the management of our college, our manager, Reverend Father Dr. Joel Dicuna, and our principal, Dr. Somnath Vibhute, for supporting this webinar. I invite our manager for his welcome address of this webinar. Reverend Father Dr. Joel Dicuna.
You can start.
It's my privilege to be.
One. सबका अनम्यूट हो गया कि देखो उधर से.
Indeed, it's my privilege to be with you all during these days of coronavirus pandemic. I'm here to join with you in a journey, process of learning. You all know that there are four main types of writing: expository, descriptive, persuasive, and narrative. Each of these four writing genres has a distinct aim, and they all require different types of writing skills. The academic type of writing involves expository, descriptive, narrative, persuasive, argumentative type of writing, which leads for the good writing of a position paper. Whereas creative type of writing involves fiction, non-fiction, autobiography, biography, derivative fiction, which leads us for the journal writing. Academic writing is rigid and procedural. Its purpose is to convey knowledge, data, and information. It's orderly, organized, methodical, systematic. It follows a formula. It's necessary and can be done though. Anyone who makes choice of it can master it. Of course, everyone has to master it at some stage of life. Creative writing is inspired and artistic. It entertains with word pictures, concepts, and profound meaning. It's enjoyable to read and touches us while teaching us. It's in art form. It's not necessary to learn, but a joy to those who do it. Academic writing must be taught, but rarely it is. Creative writing is optional, but is almost always the focus of writing curricula. Academic writing may earn you A's or acclaim, but will demand your time and sweat. It is said 99% of perspiration and 1% of inspiration. So creative writing may get you published easier, but not that easy. The 5 sensory details of sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste will fascinate us. It's not limited only to creative writing, but while understanding academic writing, these sensory details are also to be taken into account. It's not either or. It's not about choosing academic or creative writing. Both are necessary in intellectual life, in the pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. While choosing duty and beauty helps us to live, another one to make life interesting, worth living. So both are necessary, needed for nourishment and also enrichment. I'm aware the theme of this international seminar is getting published, academic and creative writing. Though I dwelt a little on academic and creative writing. Now about publishing. Publisher and publishing house is very vital. It's about getting published what is written. Academic writing and creative writing. And we have the goodwill in the very companion of this international seminar. I believe Cambridge University Press, known for its meticulous approach, studious worldview, and quality of publications. I have to admit, I made use of varied publications of the Cambridge University Press when I did my doctoral study in Rome. So we'll have good stuff today and in the days to come as well. I wish the chief guest of today's seminar, Dr. Sudhir Nikam, the chairperson of the Board of Studies in English from the University of Mumbai, both the well-acclaimed speakers, Dr. Mark MacLeod, the senior lecturer, Charles Stutes University from Australia, and Dr. Sanjay Gupta, language training consultant and English teacher, educator from our own country, motherland, India. And all of you to enjoy, to relish, and to cherish these vital moments of the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. Now I request our principal, Dr. Somnath Vidde, to address the webinar.
Thank you, Professor Neil. Am I audible?
Yes, but your sound echoes.
One moment.
I think there are two machines in the same room. That's why the sound.
Just a moment. Give me a moment.
Yes.
Am I okay now, Anil?
Still there is echo.
Just a minute. Yeah. Anil, am I audible now?
Perfect.
Hello.
Yes, perfect. Good to go.
Yeah. Respected manager of St. Gonzalo Garcia College, Reverend Father Dr. Joel Dicuna, Chairperson, Board of Studies in English, University of Mumbai, Dr. Sudhir Nikam, Language Training Consultant, Mr. Sanjay Gupta from Cambridge University Press, Professor Mark Masliot, Charles Stewart University, Australia, Dr. Sachin Labde from the University of Mumbai, fellow participants in this international webinar, and my dear colleagues, a very good morning and a warm welcome to all of you. In today's world, scholars, teachers, and researchers invest a good amount of time in the purposeful investigation in diverse areas of their interest. This leads to a wider discoveries at research centers, universities, and schools of thought. The value addition in the sphere of this knowledge should be available to budding researchers in particular and humankind in general. In this context, the publication of inventions and discoveries assumes high significance. Researchers always confront some important questions, such as why to publish, what is being published, and how to publish it. Assure that this endeavor from our Department of English in collaboration with Cambridge University Press and the University of Mumbai will certainly lead us towards answers to many such questions which are in the minds of participants of this webinar. Once again, I welcome both the resource persons, Professor Mark Masliot and Mr. Sanjay Gupta, and all of you in this webinar, and offer my sincere wishes to this webinar. Thank you very much, and over to you, Dr. Anil.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now I request Professor Deltina Rumau to introduce our two speakers who are going to do sessions with us. Deltina.
इसका वॉल्यूम बढ़ाना पड़ेगा. Yes, Anil sir.
She needs to be on. Okay, good.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. Anil sir, am I audible?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speakers today. We have two guest speakers, Dr. Mark MacLeod and Mr. Sanjay Kumar Gupta. I begin with the introduction of Dr. Mark MacLeod. He is a member of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Charles Sturt University and has taught children's literature, Australian literature, and creative writing at university in Australia and around the world, and most recently even in India too. Dr. Mark is the president and publishing director of Dirt Lane Press. He has also been publishing director at Random House and publisher at Hachati, Australia. Dr. Mark is a former national president of Children Book Council of Australia. He has won awards for distinguished service to children's literature and for many titles published under his own name imprint, Mark MacLeod Books. He is a board member of International Research in Children's Literature published by Edinburgh University and the Tasmanian Writers Centre, TAS Writers, in Hobart, where he lives. He is the author of poems for adults, children, and picture book for children. Thank you, sir, for being the part of today's webinar. Our second guest speaker for today is Mr. Sanjay Kumar Gupta. He is a consultant in teacher education and corporate communication. He is MPhil in ELT. He worked as a lecturer in a teacher training institute in Bangalore for 3 years and later as a teaching associate in University of Iowa, USA and IMM Ahmedabad. Mr. Sanjay is active as a youth specialist, basic education consultant, program evaluator, teacher educator, and curriculum developer. He has organized workshops and training sessions for several educational institutions and corporate sector. He has also contributed in several in-service teacher education programs and presented papers in national and international conferences. As a teacher trainer, he has attended Hornby Summer School and trainer program organized by British Council and Relo US Embassy, Delhi. Mr. Gupta has been associated with Pratham Gujarat, Relo US Embassy, Delhi, Cup India, British Council, Mumbai, IMM Ahmedabad, University of Iowa, USA, RIF Bangalore, and many more in the list. His special interests include teacher education, language testing, and management communication. It's an honor to have you, sir, as a guest speaker. We welcome you for today's webinar. Thank you. And now I hand over to Dr. Anil.
Thank you, Deltina. I'll introduce our third speaker, an important person today, the chief guest for this webinar, Dr. Sudhir Nikam, who's also chairperson of Board of Studies of English, University of Mumbai. Dr. Sudhir Nikam is a council member of Research and Recognition Committee of University of Mumbai. He's an associate professor and head of postgraduate department of English, BNN College, Bhiwandi. He is a former secretary of Indian Association for Canadian Studies, Vadodara, member of member of Board of Studies in English, Nagpur, Kolhapur, Bhavnagar, and many other autonomous colleges. Is a member of Research and Recognition Committee of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Technological University and KJ Somaiya Comprehensive College, Mumbai. He has guided 13 PhDs and evaluated 80 plus PhD theses and conducted vivas in various universities. He has delivered lectures in national and international conferences, conducted several sessions in UGC HRDCs at Mumbai, Hyderabad, and Ahmedabad. He has published books in journals at national and international level. So I request Dr. Nikam to give his address the participants. Dr. Sudhir Nikam.
Yeah. Good morning, friends. Let me thank the organizers for inviting me here. to address in the inaugural session of the international webinar on getting published, academic and creative writing. Let me thank Dr. Father Reverend Dr. Joel Dicuna, the manager of the management, Principal Dr. Somnath Vibhute, the head of the department, and the convener, Dr. Anil Sonone, Madam Deltina Rumao, the resource persons, Dr. Mark MacLeod, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, and the man behind the scene who has taken a lot of efforts in organizing this webinar, Dr. Sachin Lavde, Associate Professor, Department of English, University of Mumbai. Friends, to begin with, as Dr. Anil Sonone has clearly defined what is publication and how to go about it, the webinar is mainly meant for the technical guidance or technical assistance regarding how to get the work published. So here we are not helping you getting your work publishing in a way, but we are going to train you how to publish it, what ethics a person who wishes to publish should follows, and certain norms that are universally accepted all over the world. So standard publication has to be encouraged everywhere. So this is the main purpose. And as far as publication is concerned, publication is not simply something that an author writes and simply gets it published and gets circulated. So publication has so many associations with it. Like if we talk about in legal terms, in legal context, publication is related to Copyright Act. It is related to IPR. It also is related with distribution of copies of a work to public by sale or other means like transfer of ownership, or it may be a lease or rent or lending. The publication of books involves certain crucial factors like production, distribution, and reception. In a traditional way, the perception about publication is and its production and dissemination is an author writes a book and he sends it to the publisher. Publisher processes it and it is being circulated with the readers, and readers give a reception to the work. However, apart from the contribution of a creative writer, there are so many practices that are involved in creation of any book or any article. These things are called as corruptions by agents other than originating authors. So here corruption means interference of those elements which are not directly authors, but these contribute in making the text meaningful. So these factors also need to be addressed. All contributors to a recorded text, whether by author or other agents, whether intentional or accidental, are to be taken into account or are to be taken into consideration. So a book in today's marketplace, it is considered as a commodity. So when someone calls it as a commodity, it is meant for sale in a market. So if it is aligned with the sale of a book in market, then certain things entail along with the publication of a book. So diverse responses to the text by different classes and groups also need to be taken into consideration. One of the scholars who has made a lot of work regarding publication and in the theory of book history studies, Robert Durton, he calls publication is a kind of cycle, or rather he says it as a communication circuit. So what is this communication circuit? It runs from the author through publisher. First there is author, then there is publisher, then follows printing press, then distributors to the readers, and readers feedback back to the author. So it is a kind of cycle which starts from the writer, where different agencies are involved, and again the last stage, that is it refers back to the author. So reader is someone who influences the author both before and after the act of composition. So these factors also need to be taken into consideration. So the author, who is a human being, who is a product of a specific culture, he needs to take into consideration various cultural factors. So he is subject to demand of the publisher. Many times, a creative writer may have so many things to convey to his readers, but certain non-author elements, which are called as corruptions, come into the way between the reader and the writer, and the writer has to go through all these processes. Author is subject to demand of the publisher. So whatever the publisher demands, accordingly, the author has to produce. Who estimates the market demand of the readers? The publisher also has to earn, and that is why he has to see the market demand of the readers, and the readers also directly influence the author and anticipates the preferences of potential audience. So certain things are involved in the publication industry. It is not simply that the author is writing at his ease and making a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Robert Durton also sees the relationship of a book with other systems like economic, social, political, cultural, and the surrounding environment. So these factors also are involved in the process of production of a text. One more thinker, D.F. Mackenzie, he calls bibliography of a text. So at the end of text, there is a bibliography, whether it is visible or invisible. So visible bibliography is at the end, but there are so many references to which are out of the text. Those are also a part of non-visible bibliography. So the bibliography is called as a sociology of text. So when we call it as a sociology of text, we need to take certain issues like human motives and interactions at each point in the production, transmission, and consumption of a text. So the last thing is consumption, because the reader is a consumer and it has to be consumed in a proper way. There are a sequence of revolutionary changes occurred right from the beginning of the way the books started getting published. So if we take into consideration these stages, initially there was oral literature. So oral literature got transformed into written literature. Most of the author used to write in hand and their own handwriting, and there were different techniques evolved. So it was a kind of manuscript culture. So this manuscript culture, or when the era of written text in turn gave way in the mid of 15th century to primarily printing culture or printing press, especially in Renaissance period, printing was very much promoted by under various patronages. And after printing press, today we are enjoying the printed works of literature. But in 20th century, at the end of 20th century and the beginning of 21st century, we are talking about the revolutionary changes in digital humanities. So we need to accept all these changes. So might be we are not aware, when oral literature got transferred into printed material, it might have been opposed by so many people, because the richness of oral literature cannot be accommodated in written text. We are aware, but some technological changes have to be made in the publication industry. Similarly, today it is a transition phase where printed text is getting transferred into digital text. So we need to also accept these changes in a positive manner. It does not mean that printed text are going to disappear, but wherever possible, for example, in the time of pandemic like this, we are enjoying digital literature, and it is helping us in a variety of ways. Again, McKinsey talks about contribution to book. So a book has a lot of contribution, like there is someone called as literary advisor. So literary advisor gives advices to the creative writer in different ways, directly or indirectly. Then there are copy editors. Copy editors also help a writer in different ways. Then book designer is there, printer is there, who all these literary advisor, copy editors, or book designer or printer, they many times they often little or no consultation with the author make changes in the book. So the copy or the writer creates, and the copy that is kept in the hand of the reader gets total transformation. So many times an author simply uh, submits his book or submits his manuscript to the publisher, and so many processes happen during this, and entirely different uh, object happens to be published. So author sometimes is not aware about these things. So typography, spatial layout, illustrations, paper, bindings, all these are non-verbal features of a literary work of art. And these non-verbal factors have an equally expressive function. So apart from the text or the manuscript that the author produces, these non-verbal features also matter a lot, which have expressing function and contribute to the meaning of verbal text. So there is a constant interaction between the verbal and the non-verbal entity. Apart from that, there is some politics in publication, which various thinkers have discussed. For example, Jane Tompkins has discussed, for example, investigated the importance of an influential coterie of friends, reviewers, magazine editors in establishing and sustaining the reputation of a novelist. So there is certain group or coterie which decides the reputation of a novelist. So if a novelist get a proper platform or proper opportunity, only then he could survive in the literary market. And another philosopher, Janice Radway, shows in 1920s there was a club or there was a panel which was called as Book of the Month Club. So this Book of the Month Club used to meet once in a month and promote various new emerging writers. So what was their standard? Their standard was not based on the merit of the author, but the standard was based, or it was decided by matching the book to the tastes and preferences of specific group of reader in literary marketplace. Even if they are willing to promote a creative writer, they have to take into consideration the demand of the marketplace. So friends, all these are issues which are related directly or indirectly in the publication industry and the production of a book. And I'm sure that the dignified resource persons and the organizers will address this issue in the coming sessions. Thank you, Dr. Anil, for inviting me here. Over to you.
Anil sir, you unmute yourself.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Dr. Sudhir Nikam. Now I would like to invite Dr. Mark McLeod for his to share his ideas on how to get published, what is academic writing and what is creative writing. Those who want to ask questions, you can ask questions in the question answer session when it would be moderated at the end of the two sessions that we are going to have. You can also type your questions in the question answer section or chat session. Thank you. Over to Dr. Mark.
Namaste, and thank you so much for having me here. It's a real honor to be with you, and I realize that I will be speaking a little fast, so I will try and slow down because Australian accents can be a little bit difficult sometimes. One of the things that I want to start with is the whole idea of publishing as an evolving process. That sometimes when we're looking to advisors for a guidance, we say, oh, you know, well, what are the half dozen rules? What are the rules that I need to observe in order to be published? And as we've already heard this morning, those keep changing. One of the things that I love about the banner on the Tara Books website is this line: pushing the boundaries of the book form in an age that is busy writing its obituary. Well, for most of my career, people have been trying to write the obituary of the book as a form. And each new wave of technology seems to threaten existing platforms of publication and distribution. But it's important for us to understand that each new development in technology obliges us to reposition existing technology. That is to say that, well, for example, my parents, when I was a child, thought that the advent of television would be the death of radio. And for a little while it was, until radio discovered that it could do something that television could not do. First of all, it could do 24/7 talk, which television was not very good at. It could do 24/7 music. It could do 24/7 news before CNN found that you could do that on television as well. Another thing, to present on radio, you could do it in your pajamas. You didn't have to worry about obsessions with appearance, as people do on various kinds of screen. And for all you know, I could be working in my pajamas right now. So in the late 1980s and early 90s, everybody was concerned that boys were no longer reading. And so there's this huge push to publish books about sport and computers because everyone was sure that that would bring boys back to reading. CD-ROM technology at the beginning of the 1990s looked as though everybody said that was going to kill off the book entirely. And for about 5 minutes, everybody was terrified of CD-ROM, and publishers all around the world were pouring so much money into CD-ROMs, which turned out to be like the beta videotapes. That nobody ever thinks of CD-ROM after about 1993, when the availability of the internet changed the way that we could access various kinds of text. That's a really interesting date. In 1993, there were about 1,500 websites on the internet. Today, the best guess is around 1.8 billion websites. So this is a massive change. And the popularity of games on the internet during the 1990s into the 2000s made everybody worry about whether books were going to ever be fast enough to interest these readers who loved, you know, fast movement and special effects, almost like an extreme sport. And so, publishers, particularly for children, started to publish books with lots and lots of pictures in them, books that were breathless in their pacing, publishers for adults started to publish books by people like Tom Clancy, Matthew Riley, people who, frankly, when I try to read their fiction, I just feel exhausted after reading a page or two. And this was a direct response to the fear that traditional book publication was far too slow. The development of ebooks, of course, seemed to spell the end of what's been called codex publishing or hard copy publishing. One change was immediately that nonfiction became almost, hard copy publication became almost irrelevant for most nonfiction. Previously, nonfiction had always been in hard copy out of date before the book was even published, because the book would take, let's say, at least 1 year, maybe 2 years in publication and preparation, by which time all its data was out of date. And so the internet obviously allowed us to publish research which is more closely aligned with what's actually going on in the academic world. Something quite unexpected happened in the publishing of ebooks. In Australia, for example, everybody thought that ebooks would, Australians are great early adopters, and everybody thought, okay, that's the end of hard copy books. Well, the publication of ebooks has hovered at around 20 to 25% of sales since they were first appearing, and they remain there now. But here's the interesting thing. What publishers in Australia discovered was that there was a growing trend for people who had enjoyed an ebook to then seek it out and purchase it as a hard copy. Now, why is that? That's a really interesting question. You know, going back to that whole issue of the social conditions, the cultural conditions of publishing, why is it that people enjoying an ebook would then go out and buy the same book as a hard copy? Is this because the adults, for example, who enjoy fiction have mostly been brought up on that old technology, on hard copy? And so they feel threatened. They feel that the ebook may be too ephemeral, and that a book that they loved may not be there in 10 or 20 years' time when they want to go back to it. Or the idea of passing a book on to your children or your family or your friends may not be possible if it's an ebook. So people started to buy up hard copies. You see, we're constantly recalibrating publishing on the issue of pace. What we found after the anxiety of the 1980s, 1990s about the slowness of book publishing is that we actually like that. That is now regarded as a big plus in book publishing. Probably the best thing that I've ever heard said about a book by a young person was my daughter when she was 8 years old. And I said to her, "What are you reading?" And she said she was reading the classic Australian novel for children, Hating Alice and Ashley. And she said it with a little shiver. She said, "My teacher is reading us a new chapter every day, and I can't wait for the next bit, but I don't want it ever to end." I can't think of a better appreciation of what we love about reading books than I can't wait for the next bit, but I don't want it ever to end. So you see, just as our society became interested in what slow food, as it's been called, offers as against fast food, slow publishing and slow reading became a really important counterweight to fast publishing and highly paced books and very exciting kind of narratives. So we found that we actually love the properties of language, its sensuousness. We love the sound of the words, which you can't really appreciate in a fast moving film, for example, or a video game. We found that we really loved the thoughtfulness, the philosophy in a slow reading process. We found that we could spin the book out, as my daughter was implying, so that, and I mean, I guess you've got next to your bed or next to on your desk, you've got books that have been on the go for quite a while. I've got one that I don't really want to finish. I'm just enjoying little bit by little bit. And so I want to live in the world of that book forever, I think. And therefore, the slowness of book reading becomes a plus rather than a minus. In a decade where we're obsessed with the phrase fake news, thanks to one particular world leader, we're also rediscovering the advantages of editing in book publishing. Frankly, you still have in what is published online largely unmediated data, that it's raw data. There's not much editing goes on. And so those of you who asked what are the opportunities in the future in publishing, there are definitely going to be more opportunities for editing, the editing process. I think editing is such a skill, you know, is kind of helping the writer to pace the book, to tighten it up, to understand how readers are going to respond to it. I can't tell you the number of teenage books I've read recently that are published with a page extent of around 400 to 500 pages, and they could easily have at least 100 pages cut out because the editors are being slack. So we've decided that we really need and like the fact that there is mediation in the publishing process away from the digital environment, that there is an authoritative filtering of material. For example, when I was a children's publisher at Random House, there was a particular very high profile Australian writer who was writing about the Australian marsupial mouse. And she said in this text, it said that the mouse was, which is about the size of a matchbox, and it said that the mouse had a tail 20 centimeters long. That went through 3 editors before someone picked it up, and the someone was me, and said, a mouse that size with a 20 centimeter tail, I think you might mean 20 millimeters. That kind of, and that was in an information book, that kind of editing, that kind of filtering, and the fact checking, which now we're seeing increasingly on television news, for example, and on the internet. Well, I mean, the internet itself, Twitter and Facebook, the current discourse is about whether those multi-billionaire owners of those platforms are willing to step in and act as mediators or publishers rather than distributors. So the first thing I want to say to you is that publishing is an evolving process. That means that whatever your manuscript is, it's important for you to ask yourself, why do I want a book to be published? Why am I having it published? Well, there are many reasons that you might want your book published. First of all, because you've got a good story and you want to share it. You're just busting to tell. If you go back to the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, it's the classic story in our literature of the person who's got a story and they're almost authoritarian in the way that they pin the listener down and want to tell their story and won't let you get away. So in academic publishing, same thing. Your new research enters into a dialogue with preceding research. So you've got a new story that you want to tell, just as if you've got a reversal of the Three Little Pigs or whatever it is, you've got in fictional creative writing publishing, you've got a new story. There's an equivalent in creative writing there. The desire to hear the voices of silenced minorities occupied publishing in the last half of the 20th century and continues to do so. All the silenced African Americans, all the silenced women, all the silenced First Nations people around the world, all the silenced LGBTQIA members of the community. In India, it's clear that there's a lot of publishing coming out of the Northeast by people who feel that they've been ignored by what they call mainlanders, you lot down in the West and the South. You might want to publish a book because you want to find whether your story will work. You've got an idea, you want to actually have a reason to plot it out and see if it actually is as workable a good idea as you think it is. This can lead to all sorts of problems. For example, somebody sent me a children's book and this person said, this is really new, it's edgy, its narrator is a slice of bread in a loaf of sliced bread. Now, I don't know about you, but I thought that didn't really have legs as an idea, because what happens to a slice of bread in a loaf is that it's going to be toasted and eaten, or turned into a sandwich and eaten. And so I'm thinking to myself, I don't think that's a series. I think that's a little one-off story, if that. So you might want to test out your idea and see whether it works. Maybe you're wanting to publish a book because you think it will help your career. And people's resumes, CVs are full of endless pages of publications, which when you have a closer look at it, are a little bit kind of wobbly in some areas. But that's an absolute requirement of academic promotion, is publication. And so people might want to publish because of that. People might think, rather foolishly in my opinion, that they'll make a lot of money out of publishing. I think you better make sure that you've got a partner who earns a lot of money, or you've got a day job, because most creative writing is not going to earn you much money. It will earn you huge aesthetic, artistic satisfaction, but it won't earn a lot of money. Finally, you might want to share your writing with your family and friends. You might want to have their praise and approval. For at least 20 years in Australian research, academics have been asking Australian girls, what do you want above everything else? I wonder what the answer would be in India. I wonder if it's the same as in Australia and the United States, where the answer is, I want to be famous. Now, old timers like me immediately draw themselves up and say, famous for what? Wrong question. I just want to be famous. I want to be a celebrity. I want people to love me. Now, that is a totally legitimate desire, of course. And it's a totally legitimate reason to have a book published. But something interesting has happened. At exactly the same time that publishers of hard copy books have found that they have to contract their lists, that there are fewer opportunities for centimeters on the bookshop shelves, there are multiple opportunities for people to learn creative writing. It's become a really important part of the school curriculum. There are writers groups on the internet. There are people constantly sending stuff in. At the end of school vacation times, when vacation comes on, publishers always get a huge lot of submissions from people who finally have the time to write and to send their manuscripts in. So all these reasons are present. And I think it's really important, first of all, then to define what it is. The second question that I hope you would consider is, does my book already exist? Does my book already exist? In India, there have been estimates that there are 250 books published each day. In Australia, it's probably closer to 50 or 60 books a week, new titles. So even if a small proportion of those books are going out with sales reps into bookshops or going out on the internet with new releases on some publisher's website, clearly your book is going to have some point of difference, as we would say in marketing, about it. So it's really important for you to consider, do your research, do your market research, and consider, does my book already exist? If it nearly exists, what is the point that makes it unique? Can I go in there and do that? Now, how are you going to do your market research? First of all, and I must say that this is the thing that most writers do poorly. There is some, I don't know whether it's just too hard, it's too boring, this kind of work. I'm not sure what it is, or whether they just believe so much in their idea that it's going to naturally find its home. But it's really important that writers who are most successful do their market research. How do you do that? Well, go to the best-selling list. Have a look what's selling. That is places like Publishers Weekly in the United States, places like the Times, New York Times bestseller list. But we come back to the whole issue of cultural specificity. Americans right now are, quite rightly, almost obsessed with the issue of race. That is an issue in India at the moment, as I understand it, but not quite to the same extent. So if you have a book on race prejudice, a theoretical book on race prejudice, I am guessing that it's going to find more opportunities in the United States than it will in India. Not necessarily, but that might be a possibility. You should read Amazon India. Have a look at the kinds of books that are listed there as their bestsellers. Read a lot yourself. Some writers, and especially creative writers, have this romantic idea that somehow it will sully their pure creative impulse if they do too much research. Not so. Good readers make good writers. So be informed. Read book reviews, read lots of book reviews, go to festivals, listen to podcasts, look at writers' websites and publishers' websites. Have a look at what readers are saying. Particularly, ask and study good booksellers. You've got fantastic booksellers in India. It's such an exciting country to come to because, I mean, apart from anything else, you read newspapers. Like, there are so many choices of newsprint. There are so many choices in the bookshop. It's very exciting for somebody who's, for most of my career, been surrounded by the idea that books are on the way out, that somehow they're declining. Ask a good bookseller. Don't go in at the prime, sort of time of the day when the bookseller is busy, but go when they seem to have a few minutes. Kitab Khana in Mumbai for children's books. Kahani Tree is just sensational bookshop with people who, in Prabhudevi, people who read the books and they know the content and they can advise you. Up in Gangtok, Rachna Books. In Delhi, the Bookshop and Midland Bookshop. There are wonderful bookshops all over India. And what you can do to help yourself as a writer is just hang around and watch what people pick up and listen to what they say. And most of our research in Australia suggests that people spend between 3 and 7 seconds considering a book before they put it back on the shelf. So what is it they're responding to? So read the bestsellers list, read the publishers' websites, listen to readers. What you'll find from that is the answer to your next question, which publisher? So you've asked yourself, why do I want to publish? You've found out what is being published. You've found out whether your book is already in existence and how your book is different. What does your publisher publish? So having decided what kind of book you've written, go to the various publishers' websites and go to bookshops and try and place your book. What kind of publisher seems to publish this? Publishing is both a commercial business and very personal as an art form. That is to say, the publisher is guided not just by sales track records, but by her own inclinations and desires as a publisher, her own art. It's very interesting to hear the various paratextual involvements described as corruptions, because they could also be constructed as collaborations in publishing. I'm going to give you a children's example in Australia. The book Mem Fox's book Possum Magic, the biggest selling Australian picture book ever, went through 7 publishers in submission. It's now sold a couple of million copies, which is huge in a country like Australia. It went through 7 publishers before one publisher said, yeah, I'll publish this book. Now, the author uses that anecdote to demonstrate what fools publishers are. This book has sold 2 million copies. Couldn't the first 6 publishers see that it was a work of genius? Aren't publishers idiots? Any author can see that. But what she doesn't tell you is that the first 6 publishers saw a book about a mouse that was invisible. And the 7th publisher, getting that manuscript, said, you know what? There are thousands of children's books about a mouse. but there's not many books about possums. What if you turned the mouse into a possum that became invisible? And the author thought that was a good idea and did it. And 2 million sales later, what that demonstrates is the creativity of the publisher. So the publisher is a collaborator there. J.K. Rowling does the same thing with Harry Potter. She likes to brag, frankly, that I think it was 12 publishers who knocked back the first Harry Potter book until somebody recognized its brilliance. I understand exactly why the first publishers knocked that book back. It was very old-fashioned. It was in a boarding school. It was about boys. It was about magic when people had been very worried about the occult in the education curriculum and in society generally. What they didn't really understand was that we'd had a decade of very strong books about girls being published, which pleased, and rightly so, it corrected the balance in publishing, but it pleased people who wanted to see a feminist angle in publishing. And here was a time in the mid-90s when people were saying, well, that's great. You've got lots of strong books about girls, but now you've got no books about boys. They're all wimps. All the boys are wusses. So here came a book about a boy who has magical powers that are unrecognized. He's a bit of a nerd. He wears glasses, not a very sexy superhero kind of look for a kid. He goes to a boarding school where, there's 200 years of boarding school fiction. And so you would think, oh, haven't we done that? But here was boarding school where it was like a hothouse where you're kind of trapped in with everybody and it becomes a sort of playground where you can work out all sorts of social connections and values and so on. So there are really good reasons. And again, I'll go back to the internet. The internet had been available in a very extensive way to the general public for 3 or 4 years at that point in the mid-90s. Here was a book about magic and about fantasy. Suddenly, it unleashed a whole lot of fiction about fantasy and possibilities that was aligned with the whole digital era. So having a look at your publisher, what they've published, now I want to know whether they're going to publish my book. Okay, so go to the publisher's website and the whole process of submission. This is where you will need to steel yourself, because I said before that there are more and more people wanting to be published and maybe fewer opportunities of traditional publishing. The good news is there are lots of options of non-traditional publishing if you're flexible. And if you only want a Penguin paperback that gets reviewed in the Hindu and the Times of India on Saturday, then you're on a hiding to nothing. It's not a winning job, that one. If you're flexible and you've asked yourself, why do I want to be published? What other options might be open to me? You will find publication easier. Publishers on their websites will give you guides to submission. Now, some of them are quite terrifying. Affirm Press, which is one of the hot publishers in Australia at the moment, has on the website, we only accept submissions on the first Monday of every month. We won't be giving you an answer. If you haven't heard in 6 months, then you can assume that we didn't like the book. If you don't follow our instructions, then that is a story in itself, and why would we want to publish with you? So they're really tough. Hachette in India have on their website, we're only taking manuscripts from agents. And you say to yourself, wow, where do I get an agent? Well, getting an agent is just as hard as getting a publisher, if not harder. Some publishers in India will ask you, pardon me, for a synopsis, for a one-paragraph statement of what your book is about. Now, the way to think about this is, let's say a reporter from a television news service comes up and sticks a microphone in front of you and says, what's your book about? You, as the author, will feel insulted. You know, if I could sum it up in a couple of sentences, why would I have spent a year and 200 pages writing the book? That positioning is necessary. You need to be able to get it down to its essence. What are the similar books? You'll be asked to position your book in the marketplace. What is it like? And how is it different from those books? You'll be asked for a synopsis. Now, most Indian publishers will ask you for 3 chapters. Just send 3 chapters to us. Some of them will tell you that they don't accept online submissions. Others will tell you that they do. You'll need to decide that. And they'll tell you that it will take you 3 months. What you won't get from these publishers is feedback. They will either give you a yes or a no, or you won't hear, as in the case of a publisher like a Firm Press. Why is that? Don't they know that you care and that it matters to you and that you want to learn? Well, in the process of removing, or what do they call it? Shedding jobs. I hate that term. I hate that term. That companies, corporations learned they could shed jobs from the 1990s onwards. Publishers began to outsource the work that had been done in-house. So manuscript development, author management, and so on is done out of house. It's outsourced. So if you're looking for feedback on whether your manuscript is good or not, you're not going to get it from a publishing house. You'll have to go to a consultant that you trust. And be very careful with consultants. This is where you should ask other authors, who did you get advice from? Because there are so many people who are who would love to have had one of your jobs in university and didn't get one, and so they set themselves up as a publishing consultant. As a writer, you need to approach them with a good deal of skepticism and ask yourself, well, what does she know about the likelihood of my book being published? The fact that you get a beautiful letter on letterhead to give to a publisher saying, Dr. So-and-so thinks that this book must be published is not much better than the people who come to me and say, my grandchildren say that this book has to be published. Well, you know, my answer is your grandchildren love you. They want you to be loved. Really? Are they going to say, Grandma, this is a load of codswallop? No child is going to say that to their grandparents. So of course they're going to love you. It's my rotten job to be able to give you the bad news as a publisher or as a person who reads submissions. If you don't get an answer in 3 months, which is the time that Indian publishers suggest you could wait, it's quite okay, and they expect you to contact them and say, and just to see where it's up to. But please, can I give you a little advice here? Please don't go in there angry or indignant. Some authors feel that they've been relegated, that they've been treated badly by publishers who haven't got in touch with them within 3 months. Publishers, when I was at Random House, I was reading 4,000 manuscripts a year. That's nearly 100 manuscripts every week. That's a lot. So, you know, be patient and just say to the publisher, you can always say, look, I'm a little bit worried. I don't trust the post office in Australia. I don't trust this courier. I don't trust my server. I'm worried that it might not have got to you. Could you just check? Would that be okay? Mostly the publishers, if they have forgotten your manuscript, they'll feel embarrassed immediately and you'll probably go to the top of the pile just so they don't get another phone call from you. Those who go in there and say, well, you've had my manuscript for 6 months, you haven't bothered to get in touch with me, you obviously don't care, you don't have any respect for authors, guess where their submission goes? Right to the bottom of the pile. So you can definitely follow up, but wait that time. I want to say also that although websites are telling you don't send the whole manuscript, I think you better have the manuscript finished. You know, if a publisher says, okay, you've sent me 3 chapters, I'm really interested, so send me the rest, you better have the rest to send. And frankly, I would send the whole lot right from the beginning. Because if the publisher likes your submission, then they've got the whole thing there. Publishers, some websites will tell you we're not taking submissions. Well, you'll have to weigh this up. You'll have to weigh this advice from me up with what a Firm Press says. A Firm Press says, if you don't obey our instructions, why would we want to work with you? I'm saying, in contrast to that, publishers are romantics and gamblers. Every publisher thinks that the next submission might turn out to be a million seller. it might turn out to be the next Harry Potter. So it's very, very hard for a publisher to not read what you've sent. So if you've sent the whole manuscript, probably a good idea in my opinion, but weigh that up against the advice of a publisher like a firm who says, if you don't obey our instructions, obviously you're not the sort of author who we want to work with. And then finally, I want to suggest that you think about self-publishing. Many people will tell you online that this may not result in many sales, but you will get more money for each sale. I think the major problem with publishing online or self-publishing as print on demand is marketing and publicity. I know authors who have published their own books. They set up a kind of digital national tour, and then they get exhausted because they're online all day, every day, trying to promote the book they've just self-published rather than writing the next book. So I think that there are many websites which will tell you, we'll give you help. For example, in India, notionpress.com. There's also a website called writingtipsoasis.com. There are many self-publishing websites which will offer you advice and packages. Now, how much are we expecting to pay for this? It's not going to be free. It's going to start at around, I think, 25,000 rupees and will go up to about 130,000 rupees to get your book published. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Maybe you want to do it, nevertheless. And if, when you go back to why do I want to be published, if it is to give everybody in your family a lovely bound copy of a book that you've sweated on and they've sweated on for the last couple of years, then the fact that it has cost you $30 a piece and that you only printed 20 of them is okay, because you weren't trying to sell to the whole of Mumbai. But if you are looking for big sales, then I would be trying conventional publishing first. And after getting a number of knockbacks, I'd start to think about self-publishing then. But self-publishing is a rewarding but a tough road to go down. Well, thank you so much. There are many more things we could say and questions to answer, but we're out of time, and I'm very, very grateful to be invited, and dhanyavad.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Now I request Mr. Sanjay Gupta to share his ideas on getting published and academic and creative writing. Over to Mr. Sanjay Gupta.
Thank you, Dr. Anil. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. So I'd like to begin by thanking Mr. Sachin and Dr. Sachin and Dr. Anil for contacting and sharing all the information. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Joel and the principal, Dr. Somnath. Deltina, thank you for the introduction that you gave us. And I'd like to also thank Chief Guest, Dr. Sudhir Nikam, for the context, setting up the context. And I'm privileged to listen to the first speaker, Dr. Mark. I think he has addressed all the questions, the major questions that those were collated. It was such a pleasure to listen to you, Dr. Mark. I think you have given a perspective which the audience wanted. They were very keen to know how to get started. So we've really covered a lot. And I'm going to talk about a couple of things regarding publishing from experience of publishing with the Cambridge University Press. So I'll give more examples from the press, though you have heard the context of presenting from various other publishers and self-publishing and so on. So I'll draw some of the examples from Cambridge University for our reference purposes. So here is an outline of what I'm going to present. Yeah. So hope you can see the slide.
Yes.
So yeah. So this is going to be, these are some of the points that I'd like to take you through. As Dr. Mark mentioned, that it's good for us to get familiarize ourselves with what do we want to publish, do the market research, scanning of what is available. So that's something which is very critical, and I'm going to do a sort of market research of present to you what is available. I guess the audience that we have, nearly 280 participants, majority of you are teaching, and some of you might be the students, research scholars. So I'll draw the examples mostly from ELT, English language teaching, and also literature. So creative writing, academic writing, publishing of these. How do we get started? I think you had a good background to how to get started, which was presented to you by the previous presenter. What are the different roles that you can play in publishing? So you have some of these roles were mentioned by Dr. Nikam as well, and I'll revisit some of these terms. What kinds of knowledge, what do we need, the knowledge, what kind of information do we need, and skill sets do publishers, aspiring publishers, should they have? So I'll visit those. And I'm so glad Dr. Mark made it so clear to you that about something about the financial gains, if you're looking for, what is in it for you, you heard it loud and clear. Academic gains, yes, I'll touch upon it. So financial gains, I'll play down because that has been made very clear by Dr. Mark. And also I'll share with you some links, some information which you can follow. I think you must have made notes from the previous presentation. A lot of interesting information. In fact, I kept noting all those sites to visit. And Dr. Mark is more aware of India and the publishing in India than I thought so. And I was pleased to hear his the kind of deeper insight he has with the publishing, and absolutely bang on he is with what goes on in the publishing industry, be it India or be it Australia and other places. So I wanted to begin by scanning the broad categories of publications that we have. If you take a look at the CUP example, you can see there are various disciplines that you can look for. It's good for us to narrow down in which area specific I'm going to go. So I'll be talking, let's say we are going to focus more on ELT, English language teaching, and literature if you want to publish. And if that is what, if the English department faculty members are keen on publishing their work, what kind of, where should they be looking at? So broad categories of publication, if I look at it from CUP perspective, so there is a university prescription title, something that universities have prescribed. And then there are titles for open market. I'll give you some examples of each of these. So if you are trying to publish something, it would be good for you to see where you fall in. Is there a category that is clearly you are falling in? And is there something, an interest area that you have? As it was mentioned earlier, it's good to know who is your audience. Who are you writing for? Is it for writing for yourself? Are you writing for your creative writing and you want to get it published for being famous? Or you want to have a certain target audience in mind? So it's good to know which target audience are you aiming at. We also, so there are some university adaptations, CBCS, choice-based credit system, UGC has started, where there are certain titles under that. There are exam preparations. You must have heard of exams like BEC, Business English Certificate from Cambridge University, and OET. There are other exams like IELTS exam. So there are textbooks related to these exams, which CUP publishes. And then there are bespoke solutions, which are customized solutions on need of a particular client, be it a corporate client, schools, particular institution, larger organizations. CPD for teachers, professional development, continuous professional development titles in that field. Some of you who have been teaching for 20 or 30 years and you want to contribute to the field, you think your contribution will make a difference. So you want to write down something which will help the other professionals to grow, and you have something in your mind, you can look for that space. And then all of you are aware, the digital space, a lot of materials are being published these days on the digital space. You have got I'll share with you some examples, be it app-based material, be it something online learning, be it a blend textbook. So for budding writers, aspiring writers, there are lots of opportunities, and the more you go and do your research, it helps you to understand. For literature books, you can have anthologies, a lot of books on communication skills. If you're teaching English, you must have come across books which are literary. There are literary items, and then there is a communication skills and grammar and composition, pure grammar books, and also there are some titles on ESP. Let's look at some of the examples of the titles which are in place. As Dr. Mark mentioned, that there are 250 books published. I was amazed at the statistics. I must admit I was not aware of it. So if I'm publishing something in any of the beat for grammar or for any other field, I would rather scan and see what is available. The examples that I'm showing you are all from Cambridge University Press, but you can also look for other publishers as to what they have published recently, what is in market, and what you are going to publish. So how is your book going to be different? So you have got some trade titles. These are for general consumption on writing skill, but these could also be adapted to a particular university's requirement or a course requirement. Lots of books in the last 10 years we have heard on soft skills. So UGC is asking you to run courses on soft skills. So there are already textbooks available. If you want to write one, you need to update yourself as to see how your book is going to be different from what is already there in the market. What areas have been covered? Would you like to bring a different perspective, different examples, some more case studies that you have, which you think will put you apart from others? So it's good to do the research of what is available. Course on technical writing. Some of you are teaching in engineering colleges. So what would help engineers? What kind of text would help? So these are some, and then you can have customized titles. Some university comes up and says, here is a syllabus and would like to have a course textbook. So Kanpur University has collaborated with CUP to come up with Embark. And then you have got something for JNTU, which is English for engineers. So there are several titles which are customized for a particular institution, organization. And if you want to have a title for your own institute, you can approach the publisher and say, these many students are going to take this course and I'm interested in this kind of book and here is the content and so on. So if you have that kind of categorization in your mind, it will help you and the publisher to arrive at a decision. And you can have more say in it once you have a clear audience in your mind as to who you are writing it for. And as teachers, professionals, many a times we have been using others' textbook, and we feel as a teacher in your lesson plan, when you have made certain changes or students have given you some feedback, inputs, and you felt strongly that you could do a better job, or you have a different perspective on the way the course is delivered, and you want to write a book good for you to browse as to what is available, what has been done, and how you're going to sort of differentiate yourself, what would be something unique about your contribution there. So choice-based credit system, I'm not sure if you have, not sure if you are offering this in your university, college, but this is something that is happening across the country now. UGC is promoting in a big way. There is no fixed syllabus. Each university is sort of working on their own syllabus. Delhi University has on several areas. So here are some titles that you can see on your screen, which have been published for credit-based choice system, aligned titles related to that. So if you are teaching a credit-based course and choice-based credit course and you want to publish, so you need to again do a similar research to find out how you're going to make it specific. And as I mentioned, there's something to do with teachers' professional development. Some of you have been teaching for long, and you have developed an insight. Some of you have conducted a lot of workshops. You have been invited into several international conferences or national conferences, and you think that your experience by putting it together, this will help the audience. So that's one area that you can explore. You have some of these titles which you can look at. You can play different roles when you are contributing in these be it CPD or other form of text. I'll come to different roles that a writer can perform. There are a wide range of choices for you available. So as I mentioned, there is something on the digital space. So there are communication apps. So if you are good at technology and you have been playing a lot of video games, and you think that you will be able to come up with an app. There are already existing apps on learning English. Cambridge University Press has for the beginners, for the intermediate and higher level. So as you are aware of CEFR scales, CEFR, you can look at those scales, and if you want a textbook at a particular level, or not textbook, I mean the app version of the material. So this is another area for you to work on, those of you who are interested in coming up something on in the digital space. I need to see how we need to have some time for question answer as well. So I'll try to see that I make it another 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll have some question answer as well, which is very vital. In fact, I went through some of the questions that you have sent, and those were very, very interesting. And so you have got now blend materials, which are, there is a textbook and there is also online material. So Cambridge University Press also has a CLMS, Learning Management System, on which these books are mapped. So people can log on to the website. Universities have many universities in Nagpur. Raisoni University had adopted this, so they can have a text. Students can have text they can online. So this is another area. If you are interested in technology, you can harness the skill to come up with content which can be mapped onto a learning management system. So there is a lot of opportunity coming up for those of you who are interested in technology and have been curious to contribute in that space. Now, as I mentioned earlier, having looked at the roles, different kinds of texts that are available, what are the different roles that you can perform? You can be a writer, yes, but there are also other opportunities, avenues for you. Sometimes you send, as Dr. Mark had told you, that you send a submission. A publisher decides that this is not something that they would like to publish, but they are impressed with your work. So they can get back to you and say, here is an editorial kind of work we have for you. Would you be interested? Or you could have would you be willing to do some proofreading work? So there is a consulting editor, there is a content developer, the author, there's a co-author, somebody, they find your work interesting. So you may not outright get published, but if you have been in this field and you have been scanning, chances are you may also like them when the publisher finds that there is already one author and they want somebody, they're looking for someone else. You could be a fit there. So sharing your work and you getting rejected doesn't mean that the end of the world there. You might come up with different other opportunities. So there are a role of copy editors. And those of you who are doing commerce, and if there are people in audience who are young students and they are doing postgraduate programs, so there are other roles that goes with publishing. So you have you need publishing controllers. So if you have anthologies you are publishing and you have a lot of you have borrowed texts, so you need to get permission from the authors. So that's a domain also. You need people who have managerial skills of managing a project. So that's another area. Data analysts, will this book sell? Who are the audience? Who is consuming how much? And you had some interesting data that Dr. Mark shared with you. The example that he gave, that people look at a book for 3 to 7 seconds before they put it back on the shelf. So there is a research that has gone on the subtle aspects of consumer behavior, or the distribution channels and so on. So there is a role of business analyst there, data analyst there is a role of intern, there is a role of production engineer and so on. So the core writer jobs are on the left side, but then there are other periphery jobs which are with publishing industry, and people do multiple kinds of tasks. So publishing is not just writing, but then there are a whole lot of other areas that you can explore. All right, I'm moving on to something which are desirable knowledge and skill sets that you require. I'll not read out all of this, but I think you would agree with me that having some expertise in the subject area is non-negotiable. So wider your reading, the more exposed you are. That's something going to help you. And awareness of the publishing process. If you are not, you're going to get disappointed again and again by the rejection or the kind of communication that you engage with the publisher. So I'll tell you something, what you can do if you want to raise your awareness of the publishing procedure, and you think that you can, this will help you, and also some of you are guiding PhD and MPhil students, so you can also help them at a younger age to get a formal degree. I'll just go a little forward maybe, and all right, I think we'll go one by one. Okay, certain level of language proficiency. If you're publishing in the English language, definitely you need to have higher level. But suppose you're publishing something in other subject area, maths or physics or chemistry and other things. If you have lesser proficiency in language, publisher can help you with editing and other things. But then the expertise in the subject area would become a non-negotiable, definitely there, which is the case with other subject as well. Plagiarism, which is not taken very seriously in many universities in India. This is something which is, which is emphasized in all Western countries. So cut, paste, copy, and writing of any kind, and what it can do to your career, your professional life. I think people need to be thoroughly aware of this. This is not, I'm repeating this, though I know that in, all of you are aware, but this is one area that we need to be very, very sensitive in the present time. This is just to give you an example. When I was teaching at IIM Ahmedabad, we used to have students writing 400, 500 reports, and we would put it through software, which can tell us how many lines, how many words have been copied from which sources and so on. So, these days of technology, any copying, any sort of borrowing without acknowledgement can put you into great trouble. So I'm not going to read out all of this: gender sensitivity, awareness of socio-political events happening around you, cultural sensitivity, IT skills. Some basic IT skills. You need not be somebody who's writing a coding software, but you need to understand formatting, adding, things like that. If you don't have, you can develop those skills over a period of time. Keen eye for details. You got an example of centimeter, milliliter. Dr. Mark that mentioned. So such level of eye for details need to be, which is something a publisher would love to, have in author. So if you are writing something, sharing with colleagues, reviewing, getting your work reviewed by colleagues, and you sharing, editing others' work also harnesses your skills. Being receptive to feedback is an equally important thing. And we need to be ready to receive all kinds of feedback. It's not always that pleases our ears. So you can look at, IGNOU has a course on postgraduate diploma in book publishing. And then Calcutta being the hub of publishing, you have Jadavpur University, and many other universities which offers a diploma and certificate program in publishing. So if you really want to make a career in this field, definitely you can look at the content of this. And if you are interested, you can do a distance mode program, which will help you in future. You will be more aware of the different roles that I talked about earlier. So it doesn't come as a surprise to you. All right. The time doesn't permit. I think there is something called Cambridge Author Hub. I'll put up the links to this. You can look at it for yourself to become more aware of it. So these are the links that you can go through to become more aware of what goes into publishing and so on. So with this, I'd like to conclude, and thank you so much for the invitation. Dr. Anil, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanjay Gupta, for this wonderful session. Now I think, have to begin with the question answer session, and I am sure that most of you have got a lot of questions after listening to these brilliant sessions. We have already received some questions in the registration, through the registration forms that you filled. Some of them we have marked, and you have been asking questions in the chat box as well. So I request Dr. Sachin Labde, who's going to be the curator of these question answer sessions. Over to Sachin. Sachin.
Thank you, Anil. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you. Um, Mark, very good afternoon to you. It must be afternoon in Australia.
Yeah.
And good afternoon now to everyone else as well. I was thinking that this session would begin, somewhere in the morning, but it's almost like 1:45, and we have this session now. So before we begin with Q&A, about which I'm very curious and excited, because there were so many questions, so many queries, which talks about the importance of a topic like this, publication. It's very close to our hearts when it comes to academicians and creative writers. So definitely we'll do that. But before that, I personally would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Mark McLeod for accepting our invitation and making time for us. Also, huge, I think, and I owe this to Cambridge University Press, and especially to Mr. Sanjay Gupta, who, very willingly agreed to give this session, make presentation. So thank you very much, both of you, for being with us. And now we'll begin with this session. But before that, I just want to give you, a quick summary of what has been happening in the backdrop. We got like probably more than 800 participants registering for this webinar. And out of these, there were more than 200 questions on publication. Now, I know it's crazy, but I think, it talks volumes about the importance of publication and how serious are we about this. And definitely just one webinar cannot really, be an answer to all these questions. So I had to kind of sort these questions. So what I have done is that, since the focus of this webinar was more on process of publication rather than process of, writing, it was not about, how you do creative writing or how you go about doing your academic writing. So we have had to check those questions out of this. So the questions mainly, which were about, say, Scopus journal and open access journals, we won't be able to take those questions. Also, the questions about the process of creative writing and academic writing, we'll brush them aside. There were questions on UGC policy on publication for career enhancement. We really need one session on this, and probably, sometime in future we can come up with one webinar exclusively on this. Also, there were questions on research proposals and teaching creative writing and academic writing skills. But I guess we are not actually, focusing on these aspects. So, and I must say that Mark and Mr. Sanjay Gupta have preempted some of the questions. So I was literally struggling to kind of, avoid being repetitive, avoid being redundant if I ask questions. And I managed to reduce these questions. I had to check out those questions again. So I have a, this request to Dr. Mark and also to Mr. Sanjay Gupta, that if at all any of the questions that I'm going to ask are repetitive, please, feel free to, like tell me that, and we can drop that question. Yeah, so here we go. Are we all good? Mark?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah, Mr. Gupta. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Perfect.
So I'll begin with these questions. In fact, these are the questions about career, and Mr. Sanjay Gupta had, he's like very vividly kind of addressed this aspect of career. And this was one of the prominent questions that we had, is that how one can make career in the field of academic writing. And I guess like Mr. Sanjay Gupta has already addressed this question. So if at all there is anything that Mr. Gupta would like to add to this, please feel free, so that, if at all anything is remaining can be addressed.
Yeah, so there are two aspects to this question. If you want to dedicate yourself to career as a writer alone, that's one. And second one, as we all do multitask these days, you are teaching somewhere, you are doing an additional kind of job somewhere else, and you want to contribute because you are in an academic profession and you think that teaching is one aspect of what you do. You would also like to publish along with it. So that's another form of career, supplementary career, additional thing that you would like to do. So I think once you have we have drawn the distinction between career in publishing per se and be dedicated to only writing as a profession. And I like the comment that Dr. Mark mentioned, that you need to have a spouse who is of income, because you're not assured of regular income there. I mean, there's not so much of, till you get the name and fame in writing, as it happens with any other profession. So yes, the second part of it, I would strongly recommend that as you are teaching, if you continue to develop as a passion for writing, be it academic journal writing, be it writing for a book, be it writing as a co-author. So I'm sure that there is this second aspect which will suit many of the professors who are teaching in university. And this is something, a skill that one has to harness over a longer period of time, developing small sub-skill sets, be it IT skills, be it, as I mentioned during the presentation, of be it the editorial skills. And each of these, there is so much to learn. And I think it takes a lot of patience, perseverance to develop these skills.
Thank you, Mr. Gupta. Mark, is there anything that you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I would. I've worked for the last 6 years with Professor Kim Reynolds, who's the senior editor at International Research in Children's Literature. And the skill that I was absolutely blown away that she has is, any book or any article that comes up for discussion, she always knows who the best reviewers are for that article or that book around the world. Now, how does she know that? She knows that because she's read a lot. She knows that because she's gone to lots of conferences. She's done exactly what you're doing by logging into a webinar like this, and noticing who is someone interesting at the edge of their field. So that sort of information in the academic field is absolutely extraordinary, you know, that bank of information. But the equivalent in creative writing is what I was suggesting to you before, that you need to know your market. You know, you need to go to the bookshops, you need to read the reviews, you need to listen to the podcasts, go to the literary festivals, all the things you're obviously all doing because you're here today. But this is kind of getting to know your field. You know, it's really quite bizarre that we've maintained some kind of romantic view about writing that's hung on here longer than it has in other areas. For example, you would never imagine somebody who's, you know, a filmmaker or potential filmmaker saying, well, I never go to the cinema, I don't have a television set, I don't participate online, I never go to the theater and so on. But if you just give me $50,000 or $100,000, I know I can make a short film. I mean, it's ludicrous. We know it's ludicrous. So why do some writers go, well, no, I don't want to be contaminated by reading too many of my contemporaries. I might be too critical of her dialogue. Her plots are terrible. You know, read them. Decide, you know, why her dialogue's terrible, why the plots don't work and so on. because then you'll make the point of difference.
Very true. Thank you, Mark. I think that was quite an insightful input. So since many of us are actually, working in universities and colleges, and many of us have our, PhDs in place. So this is one of the pertinent questions that, like when it comes to sort of translating your PhD thesis into a book. So how do you go about publishing a PhD thesis? I guess, like, this question is very close to the hearts of many people. So what precautions should be taken? Yeah. Anyone, if Dr. Mark, if you would like to address this, or even Mr. Sanjay Gupta.
This is Sanjay's field.
Yes.
All right. So yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I'm sure that you love your PhD thesis so much. You have invested so much in it. You would like the world to know about it. Yeah. So naturally, it comes, a desire to be, to share that information with others. But we also need to understand who is going to read this. Who is my audience? So is it going to be university students? Is it going to be college students? What are the numbers are we talking about? So for example, you did a research on metacognition and reading strategies. Now, that's something, an area that I have investigated. So suppose this is your work that you have done. Now, if you were to reproduce your PhD thesis in the order or the way that you have evolved it, I'm sure that it will have a very limited audience in mind. But if you can curate that text into something which is general information. First, you do a research on what kind of textbook is available on metacognition. What are the other disciplines where people would benefit from understanding of metacognition? Who will benefit? And if you were to curate that content out of that, forget that it was a PhD thesis. Now you're presenting to a different kind of audience. That time the reader was the most important reader was your guide.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the people, you wanted to please the guy to see that everything is in there. But now you have a wider audience. So I'm sure that once you start asking these questions, who is the author? Is it the psychology students who are going to read? How am I going to make it a part of a already existing syllabus, which a certain number of universities have made it a part of their syllabus? Can I highlight all those things in the blurb of the book? So once we start narrowing down the field of audience that we are addressing, there are DIET, District Institute of Education and Training, there are psychology departments. So I researched an area which I did it for my master's or PhD thesis or MPhil, but I think there is a wider section of audience who will benefit from it. And then once we have narrowed down the area and make it more relevant to them, evolve it in the book form, having looked at other textbooks available on similar titles, bringing in more case studies. I think some of these attempts would make your work different from what it was in the PhD form and when you bring it out for the general audience.
Sanjayji, thank you very much. I think that was a brilliant response. And I'm sure like those of us who are kind of listening to this webinar must have noted down. If not, this webinar again will be available. The recording will be available online after editing. So you can always get back to this and listen to this. I think you've really given, key aspects or key points in like revising PhD work when you have to transfer or translate it into a book. Thank you very much. That was a very good response. Now, this is again like, a question that is that has come from creative writers, budding creative writers that we have who have joined our webinar. The question is mainly about the status of translation, as far as publication is concerned. So what is the status of translation in creative writing? So is there any market for translation? We have, someone who can give us a national perspective on this, and Mark, who could give us international perspective on translation as creative writing. So if you could just address this one. Mark, would you like to take it first?
Probably Sanjay should take it first, and I'll add little bits, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
uh, if you walk down the streets of college, Book Street in Calcutta or Mumbai, you would know there is so much of hunger to read the translated works. There's so much of work that needs to be translated. We have got a lot of books in English, a lot of good books in Marathi or in Indian regional languages, but they have not been translated. So translation is an area which is emerging, and it has always been very popular. So those who are willing to translate and willing to publish, believe me, there is a huge world out there. Readers who love to read, and this is evident from if you go to the streets of where the college street, where the books are sold, the ones which I have seen in Calcutta and Mumbai and Ahmedabad and so on. Finding a publisher, be it a self-publishing or finding a publisher, honing your skills, developing the skills of translation which are of international standards. Some of the sensitivities which we think we are good at translation, but yes, the more we can polish our skills by exposing ourselves to work nationally and internationally, and also looking at the work of reputed publishers as to what they go through when they bring in such publications. So I think some of these will definitely help to those who are aspiring to translate work or publish in this field.
Thank you, Sanjay. I mean, this is since you also have your association with Cambridge University Press. So, like, if in order to get your literary translation published from Cambridge University Press, like, is there any specific guideline or like, do they follow certain parameters?
Right.
If you could just
so
focus
for
on
any
that.
book, yeah, sure. So if you have a title that you want to publish, if you have a manuscript that you have worked, be it translation or be it on listening skill or speaking skill or any other book that you have developed, one of the things that you can do, there is a Cambridge University website where you have a contact column where if you write, generally that's the approach, one approach to connect with the university, CUP in India. Second, you have got the sales people who come to you, marketing people like Sachin, you must be in contact with Ratnesh and Samat and others who help you in organizing this conference. So they come to you with the books and other things. So there are other people who are in touch, you are in touch with, and you can share their contact number in this group chat as well. So people can have a personal connect with people whom they know. And then also submitting that to the contact. The process, as Dr. Mark had mentioned, goes through the same process of screening multiple scripts that come and then their own analysis of what will sell, who is the audience, what numbers would work, and so on, and then the quality of the work, all of those filtering that will go through, and then you will get to hear whether the work has been accepted or not. So there is a long-term process, but that is not to discourage people. One has to be perseverant in following up with publishing the work. And it is, as I mentioned, not just with the translation work, any literary work or work in the field of language, ELT, or you have a journal that you want to publish with CUP, the process remains the same, contacting the contact us number and also following up with some of the people whom you interact with when they come to your college or university.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Mark, is there anything else that you would like to add to this?
Yes.
Please.
I think I think the process of, well, first of all, getting a good translation done is expensive, and anyone who's involved in translation knows why, because you can spend an hour or more on a single word. For example, both Professor Loveday and I were involved in a translation project recently where we would discuss things like, so in Marathi and in Hindi, does the word hat, does that include the whole arm, or is it just from there to there, or what is it, and a little tiny thing like that. There was a reference in this text, it was a text for children, there was a reference to raspberries. Well, the translator from Afghanistan said, we won't know what raspberries are. Translators in India said, well, they might know what raspberries are, but not many children would have access to them. translator in Brazil said, no, it can't be a raspberry because that's a very high class purchase. There are raspberries in Brazil, but they're very, very expensive. And so if you're trying to reach children who are from a lower socioeconomic group, they're not going to relate to that page. So there are all sorts of cultural dimensions. Anyone who's been involved in selling books at an international book fair or looking at either Frankfurt or London or Bologna, you will see publishers be offered books and they'll say, don't give me books about cheeky children because we don't approve of cheeky children in our society. A translator who was working on a Muslim adaptation of Cinderella said, well, I've had to eliminate all the magic because for true Muslims, magic is evil. And so I've had to take that out of the story. Well, as a person who knows the story of Cinderella well and loved it, I thought, so why would you do that? You know, why would you take that story and rob it of its cultural base, you know, which is that you can have a transformative magic scene, you know? So it's a really interesting question about culturally specific texts and why somebody from another culture would want to buy that text. Don't forget that we're living in an age when notoriously we are enjoying our echo chambers. In other words, we're loving books about ourselves and stories about ourselves, but not really that interested in stories about other people. Tragically, I think that's totally the wrong way, but that is the way it is. So, you know, as an Indian writer or an Indian translator, you'd have to ask yourself, first of all, do I have access to the skill that is equally good in my Indian language and in let's say English or French or whatever it is you're going to translate it into? Do I have that access or can I do it myself? Secondly, what specifically Indian cultural patterns are here that may not translate into the society I want to sell this to, and vice versa. You know, for example, half a dozen years ago, I was searching for books, LGBTI books in India. Very, very difficult at the time to find. People, when I went into Crossword, they said, we don't have any of those. Well, of course, that's not true now. It's been a very edgy area of Indian publishing and filmmaking and television and so on. But those things change over time. So again, you need to be aware of that. Are there cultural blocks that you're going to encounter?
Thank you, Mark.
Sachin?
Yeah, Anil, yes, please.
Yeah, there is a question, interesting question. I think we should take this.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask you to step in whenever you need to, because I do not have access to all the questions.
Yes,
yes. Yeah, please.
So the question is, with the digital medium coming about, how much do the publishers focus on cyber psychology and the change in the reading tendencies? It has one more part also. Can we say then that publishing is all about framing, filtering, and amplification? This is a tricky question for people who are in publishing.
I'm going to say one thing. I think you can see there's a perception that one thing that has happened in the digital era is that we think differently, that we don't have tolerance for long novels and those long leisurely kind of chapters in the 19th century British novel or French novel and so on. Well, that may be true. And we could think of any number of examples where the chapters of a narrative are broken down into little fragments. And that is a kind of expression of a fragmented society, of the fragmentation of knowledge, of the way in which, you know, in a sort of postmodern world, people put together there's no grand narrative. On the other hand, when I started part-time book selling many years ago, you could not have paid people to go to the shelves where there are great big thick books of fantasy. Why? What happened? What changed? Why do you see not just boys now, but boys and girls, men and women, young and old, go to the shelves in the bookshop or the section on the web where there are the thickest books, like 700, 800, 900 pages. Something has happened. I think the something that's happened is that we love escape. We love to immerse ourselves in another world and forget about the nonsense on television, forget about coronavirus, forget about the racist, abuse in the street and so on, and just bury ourselves in an 800-page world of another reality. So there are all sorts of things happening like that, I think.
Yeah, Sanjay ji, would you like to?
No, I think that has been addressed well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Anil, if you can wait for another question, I have a couple of questions. Or
Sure.
if you have, yeah.
I have one more tricky question, but I'll do it later.
Okay, cool. Okay, we are not in competition, so my questions are also equally tricky. All right, so Mark, this is, we are living in the world, like Insta world. Everything is like, we want instantaneously, Insta food and Insta publicity. So the question is like, how to publish quality work in less time? Is there any, shortcut to this? This is one question that has frequently been asked. So would you like to address this? Even Sanjay ji, if you could throw some light on this.
Well, question number one, why do you want to do it? What's the hurry? But that question aside, I think here's a really important thing. You have to get it right. You get one crack at the publisher. If you do, in a period when so many publishers' websites are saying, don't bother to send us submissions, we're overwhelmed, we're not going to read them. In a period where that is the bottom line, why would you risk sending them a submission that's not right in every single sentence as much as you can make it? Because you're going to get one crack at it. And don't think you can go back for a second crack. You can't. Because publishers recognize those things and they just instantly file it in the bin. Something to encourage you on this. I've been teaching creative writing and publishing of various kinds for 40, 50 years nearly. I think I have almost never given advice to a writer that surprised them. Most writers, when you give them feedback on their text, they act embarrassed and they hide their head and say, I know. You say, the ending is, no, I know. You know that you use too many nouns here. You should change the verbs. Yeah, I know. If you know, do it. Change it. Do it. Be your own editor. Because as I say, you're not going to get another chance.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. That was, I think, very creative response to this question. Sanjay ji, would you like to?
I see where this question is coming from. In the academia, the way it has happened in US long ago, and now we have been pressurized to either publish or perish. So there is a pressure, extra burden on professors for their growth, professional development to publish. We must realize, I think the point that was made earlier by Mark about getting things right and getting an impression. I think a lot of us have seen publishing of a very poor quality in the conferences. I'm not discouraging you, but you would all admit how much of copy paste has thrown on you as a paper, seminar paper or writing and so on, and you tend to start to believe that this is how papers can be written or published. I'm sorry. If you do not meet the standards, and if your conscience tells you you have largely copied and taken things from different places and put together, that's the right place to start with. So if writing is not from writing from scratch and having done all the research that needs to be done and also tallied with others, so there is no shortcut. I don't see there is a shortcut to come up with a writing just because there is a deadline for me to meet one of my increments. And if I don't need this, I can put anything on paper and get it borrowed others. You are jeopardizing your own career. Today, maybe the government is not serious, not investigating you enough. Tomorrow, you may have Mumbai University or other colleges or where you potentially get employed. They may go and investigate your work. Where did it come from? I'm sorry to say this, but this has to be taken very seriously. The way I see people coming up with conference papers, 1 week announcement, next week there is a conference paper, today comes a paper.
Absolutely.
Ready with the abstract and writing, everything
Absolutely.
all in 1 week. So this is a kind of a cheating, it's a fraud. And I don't think that being academics, we should be encouraging it and we should be part of any of these things.
Yeah.
There's no place for such.
Yeah. Yes, Mark. Yes, Mark.
I just wanted to add, I spent 7 years part-time as a bookseller on weekends because I wanted to find out what the general public, how they receive books. And I have to tell you that I think that publishers and editors, their role is to protect authors from the public. If you think that the feedback from your publisher or your editor is tough, you just stand in a bookshop and listen to the dismissive and disgusting things people say about books and the way they'll dismiss them in just a sentence or two. It's my job to protect you from that and break the news to you gently, even though I don't like doing it. But again, this comes back to excellence. While the person is face to face with us and they have a manuscript, that's why I won't read manuscripts that people wait for. You know, people will come into your office sometimes and say, here's my book, or I won't read it in front of them because I need not to have their face in my face. It's too easy to be sympathetic, to be kind, to break it to them gently, to not tell them the exact truth when they're sitting there in front of you, ready to burst into tears. You have to find a way of saying kindly the kind of tough feedback that they're going to get from the general public.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, like you responded, both of you responded, you know, spontaneously and splendidly to this ouch question. I know, like, you know, but such questions need to be addressed, and, you know, we need to be told, like, you know, look, there is no shortcut, and if you're serious about it, you have to, like, you know, take time, and you have to give time to the publisher, right? You know, it just can't get published, you know, overnight or over fortnight. So yeah. Now I think I'll give way to Anil for his tricky question. And take time. Yeah, Anil, please.
There are two questions, and they are going into ideological issues in political terrain. Okay, so, and as we know that publishing house and the publisher has some sort of ethical responsibility of what kind of books are being published. Okay, so how do the publishers or editors deal with political inclination? For instance, books like Gujarat Files by Rana Ayub in India had to be self-published and had to struggle to reach the shops. But books like Exam Warrior by our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, was a bestseller on Amazon, especially renowned publishing houses like Cambridge. Okay, there is one more question which I would like to ask in continuation with this. How do capitalist vested or capitalist interests affect the publishing of original content? Like if a publisher is not comfortable with the content which might harm the publisher's vested interests.
Dr. Mark.
Go on, Sanjay.
I would pass it on to you. I'm not exposed to that form of publication, so I'm sorry. I have no answers.
And we can actually understand that these are very sensitive questions.
Yes.
And you know, you
but
probably.
I mean, yeah, we can make it generalized, thinking that how does publishing industry or publishers or publication house would deal with societal pressures or ideological pressures while publishing a book?
Okay, I think this is a fair question, and there are general answers. When I was at Random House, the publisher for adults Random House insisted on calling publishers for children juvenile publishing. I said, that's okay, I'll wear that as long as we can call yours senile publishing. So the publisher for adults said to me, do you make ethical and moral decisions when you choose to publish a book? I said, every single day. And she looked at me, she drew herself up in a very proper way and said, well, we never do. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. People have in Australia, I mean, as you know, one of Australia's gifts to the world is Rupert Murdoch. We're very glad that he's an American citizen these days. But his empire, the managers of his newspapers and magazines and television, radio stations were asked repeatedly when he was still an Australian citizen, so does Murdoch exert influence? Does he actually intervene in the publishing process? And I think the smartest answer was given by the executive producer of the 60 Minutes program in Australia, where he said he doesn't need to, because we know what he'll tolerate and what he won't. And so actually, we've got naturalized his values or his emphases. And if we want to keep our jobs, we won't test them. And that's what happens. And so I think what Anil was saying before has happened in the digital space for both adults and for children, is topics that are too edgy for some publishers have just gone straight online. That's also why they're sometimes a bit dodgy in the way that they've been edited, you know, because they are pretty much raw data sometimes. But that is a way that authors have found that they can get their edgy material to their public without having the filters. But frankly, as somebody who's been part of that filtering process, I think on the whole, it's been a good process, and an awful lot of pretty out there publishing has been done despite all that, you know.
Okay. Sanjay ji, would you like?
No, I think I think that has been addressed,
Yeah.
and I would be
Because there was one question which was probably connected to this one, and
Right.
it was specifically directed towards Cambridge University Press.
Sure.
That does Cambridge University Press consider unsolicited? By that, what the participant meant is creative writing, manuscript.
Right. Sure, sure. I'm sure that these are welcome. Also, the press would take a call on who is going to be the target reader. You see, all those decisions about publishing, cost of publishing, who is it meant for. So their research would definitely inform them whether, as reviewers, the quality of the work, all of those would finally determine whether this will get published or not. Whether CUP accepts unsolicited sort of submissions, yes, it does. People do write, and once they come up, and that goes through a process of checking. It might take longer depending on which division it goes to. Within CUP, there is an academic division, there is an ELT division, and different divisions look for. They have their own priorities. So that's why I was showing you the kind of books that are published already. So if you have been able to filter and narrow down your area, that helps the publisher to pick on which category will it fit in. So if that kind of work the authors take on themselves, they will have more chances of they being accepted or called or getting the work further discussed. But if it is just submitted without having any planning of where it is headed, then I think it will take much longer for them to get a response.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Sure.
Anil, I hope we have time to take a couple of more questions, or are we hard pressed for time? Anil? Okay, it seems Anil is not around, but we can just take one more question before Anil intervenes and tells us whether we should go ahead or not. Mark, this question is about is publishing poetry, and what this and there were a couple of these queries, whether traditional publishing or self-publishing is good. So how do you kind of distinguish between these two? Or if you have any tips for self-publishing, what would you suggest?
It's a very exciting area of publishing because many publishers gave up, mainstream publishers gave up on publishing poetry because, you know, if there are only 500 or 600 sales or 1,000 sales, it's not a print run. That meant that it left the space for two kinds of publishing. Number one is online, through online journals, magazines, of which there are many. And number two is small publishers, and they're wonderful in New Zealand and Australia and Canada, the United States, and also in India. There have been small presses that do absolutely beautiful books. I was saying to you before that we decided, our community realized that what we loved about books was even the smell of the paper, you know, and the feel of it and so on. That's what small publishers can do. And here's the thing about sales of poetry. You might not think that you can sell many, but every time that there is a poetry festival or a reading, if you get the right books in the place at that time, they'll sell. The problem is that mainstream bookshops and mainstream websites have forgotten how to sell poetry, or they've demoted it to a position where it has no prominence anymore. So really, you do need to look for those really wonderful small publishers or start one yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So the kind of question which is related to this again is, and that we are expecting some prophetic answer. So you have to do some prophecies about this. Is that what is the future for self-publishing? Okay. Yeah. Sanjay ji, any comments on self-publishing, whether it holds any future?
I think, just take a step back from publishing. We are talking full day today about publishing. But look at the movies, look at the cinema, look at small stories which are being narrated. Once upon a time, you had to go to a theater to watch a movie produced by big film houses and so on. Right. Today, you have got Netflix. Today, you have got so many other platforms where small budget films are coming up, and TV serials or programs which are very popular series. So if you apply the same principle to publishing, I think mainstream publishing houses may not always be suitable for the kind of audience that you refer to. And self-publishing, in my personal opinion, definitely is going to grow more and more. People are becoming selective, and they do love to hear from individuals as to what they have to say without going through the challenge. See, one of the other challenges that major publishing houses have to go through is they go through the business model called B2B or B2B and C. So they definitely, there is a, they follow the distribution model. So in between there is a distributor. If the distributors do not agree to hold, keep with them, certain number of titles and so on, they may not go for publishing those.
Right.
So definitely when you have creative works of this kind, self-publishing or smaller publishers would definitely have an advantage. And for going to conferences or poetry sessions where it is held and finding the place to showcase one's work, I think that's something that authors or writers have to also think of along with publishing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I got a tip. Yes. I've got a tip for you. One of Australia's very successful poets would carry around in a suitcase or in a backpack a good supply of his books. And when he went into a bar or a cafe and would meet somebody interesting, during the conversation, out would come a book, and he'd say, "You'd probably be interested in buying a copy of my latest book." It's so hard to say no in that situation. That's what the book selling industry calls hand selling to the nth degree. You've got the book there in front of them, they've got a beer in their hand or a cup of coffee, and you're saying, "You'd probably be interested in this." So I think that's one thing you could think about. I do think that the wonderful templates that are provided for you by publishers online, such as Notion Press, are making it easier and easier. It will cost you for sure, Because they don't give away editorial services for nothing, and they don't give away design services for nothing. But the quality of online publishing means that it's almost indistinguishable from mainstream publishing now. A paperback that's been done as a print-on-demand paperback, or you know, a small press, it's hardly distinguishable in hard copy, from binding to paper to layout to everything else. It's become so great that the people who, when we first had the capacity to design on a computer screen, just really demonstrated how unusual it is to have a good eye for design. You need to know the balance of the text, you know, the text area on the page, the leading that's required, the amount of white space that the eye requires to feel rested. And so there are all sorts of technical reasons why the fact that you can just hit publisher on your computer keyboard isn't necessarily going to guarantee you a great product. But increasingly, those helps are there online. And yeah, I agree with Sanjay dear. I think there's more and more. Think about the term that we grew up with, people of my age, grew up with the term vanity publishing. You never hear that anymore. There was a pejorative sense about publishing your own book. Not anymore.
Thank you. I think, you know, that's like, it's a very positive response, and there's, you know, something for us to cheer up, like, yeah, so there's future, you know. And with this also comes the sense of like, if you're talking self-publishing, also there's self-responsibility, and also, you know, the risk factor is involved in that. So you have to be a little more disciplined, a little more careful when it comes to self-publishing. So I think these things go hand in hand. Great. So thank you very much, Mark, and Sanjay ji, thank you very much for your inputs. Anil.
One last question.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, I'm done from my side. So
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Please.
Is erotic literature treated differently by publishing houses? For example, 50 Shades of Grey. The question from a young student. So.
Well, it depends what kind of erotic literature you're talking about.
Exactly.
50 Shades of Grey, for example.
There's an abundance of erotic literature online. I don't know where to get it, but I'm sure that some of you do. As far as 50 Shades of Grey are concerned, you know, again, that's a culturally specific moment. I'm not sure it would work now. The same as, sorry, just to extend that thought, Hunger Games has survived, and I mean, it's terrible writing, but it's really great ideas and it's great politics and so on. But as an editor, you just want to get in there and help that writer write better sentences. Whereas Twilight, which was, I do realize that there's been a sequel to Twilight, but it's not going to sell. Twilight's been almost forgotten. Why? Because it was, again, a culturally specific moment. There were all these middle-aged women readers, frankly, some men readers, but mostly women readers, reading about young vampires, young male vampires. That, again, is something that was of its time. I'm not sure it would work right now. In fact, with social distancing, you want to keep a long way from any vampire in the room, I would think.
Yeah.
Okay, I think the angels are passing. So we had one moment of silence. Yeah. So Anil, I think from my side, like these were the questions. There were many, but then we had to kind of filter those questions. And given the time frame, we can't really go on and on. But this is very fascinating, and I'm sure, you know, in future we'll come up with many more such webinars. So Dr. Anil Sunavne, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to interact with two scholars, you know, Dr. Mark McLeod and Mr. Sanjay Gupta. It was a pleasure, you know, to interact with them. So thank you, and I hand it over to you, Anil.
Thank you, Sachin. Thanks for going through all the questions and picking up the ones that were important. We definitely have some other questions also which came now, but due to the time constraints, I think we'll have to move to the next session, which is a vote of thanks, thanking the people who are involved in this. And I request our Vice Principal, Professor Captain Jose George, to present a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Anil. Good afternoon to all respected guests and fellow participants. This webinar was beautiful because there were around 280 participants attended and 100 left after the main talks, but 180 people remained. So we got 180 seekers through this webinar. Friends, the quality of education depends on the quality of teacher and his delivery of lectures. His delivery becomes effective as a result of vast reading. His reading will guide him to issues that remain to be tackled. The study on these issues give birth to new writings. Though publishing, we contribute our findings to through publishing, we contribute our findings to the world. I truly believe that today's webinar helped us to understand challenges and method in publishing our writings. San Gonzalo Garcia College of Arts and Commerce, affiliated to the University of Mumbai, stands for development of the students and faculty. Take this opportunity to thank our manager, Father Dr. Joel Dana, accepting our invitation and blessing the webinar with a kind and informative words. We Dr. Nikam, Person Board of Studies, for informing the challenges of today's creative writings. We thank Professor Mark for your wonderful exposition. And we thank you for bringing before us the history, growth, and challenges in academic writing in a systematic manner. We thank Mr. Sanjay Gupta sharing his experience and research on publishing and explaining to us the way we should go for publishing and what all things we can publish, the roles in publishing, etc. Dr. Sachin, we appreciate the effort that you've taken to bring together important questions and brought it before us. Our special thanks to Jetking Vasai branch for providing us the Zoom platform for conducting this webinar. We thank our principal, Dr. Somnath Vibhudev, for his leadership and initiative in strengthening us to go with this webinar. We thank Dr. Anil, Head of the Department of English, Gonzalo Garcia College, for organizing this webinar in a wonderful way. Thank you, Dr. Anil, for finding out suitable and wonderful speakers for this webinar. And we thank our special thanks to all the participants for making this a wonderful program. Thank you. Back to Dr. Anil.
Thank you, Jose sir. Yes, Mark and Sanjay ji, I thank you a lot for doing these sessions. They were interesting and we had fun listening to your answers.
Thank you.
And I am sure that all the participants benefited from it. They would definitely let us know through their responses. We have given them feedback, so they would give us feedbacks regarding the webinar. And I would also like to thank our principal, Dr. Somnath Vibhude, who wholeheartedly supported this activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sanjay.
Thank you.
Soon.
Thank you. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.